My mother-in-law wanted to eliminate my unborn daughter. My husband stood frozen as she came at me with a syringe. But they didn't expect what I did next. I'm Amanda, and this is the story of how I discovered the most horrifying family secret imaginable. What started as a perfect pregnancy turned into a nightmare that would change everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted most. 7 months pregnant and glowing. That's what everyone said about me. Mark and I had been trying for 2 years, and when we finally got pregnant, his mother, Helen, insisted we move in with her. First-time mothers need guidance, she'd say, arranging my prenatal vitamins with surgical precision each morning. You have to stay healthy for the baby. Helen was a retired nurse, so everyone trusted her medical expertise. She'd measure out my supplements, prepare special smoothies packed with nutrients, and even scheduled extra ultrasound appointments. I want to make sure everything's perfect, she'd tell Mark, who nodded approvingly at his mother's dedication. But something in Helen's eyes made my skin crawl. Have you ever had that feeling when someone's being too helpful? When their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes? The nursery was picture perfect. Soft yellow walls since we wanted to be surprised about the gender. A handcrafted crib that had been in Mark's family for generations, and tiny clothes organized by size. Helen spent hours in there, rearranging things, muttering about carrying on the family name and the importance of tradition. Mark worked long hours at his law firm, leaving me alone with Helen most days. She'd make me elaborate meals, insisting I eat every bite. "You're eating for 2 now," she'd remind me, watching as I forced down her special protein shakes that tasted oddly metallic. The first crack in my perfect world came when I found Helen's appointment book left open on the kitchen counter. There, in her neat handwriting, was an ultrasound appointment scheduled for next Tuesday, an appointment I knew nothing about. When I asked her about it, Helen's face went pale for just a moment before she recovered. "Oh, honey, I wanted it to be a surprise. I scheduled a 3D ultrasound so we could get beautiful pictures of the baby. Mark thought it would be wonderful." That night, I mentioned it to Mark over dinner. His reaction was strange. He avoided eye contact, pushing food around his plate. "Mom just wants what's best for the baby. She's been through this before with my sister." But Mark's sister, Lisa, had never had children. I knew this for certain because Lisa had confided in me about her infertility struggles just months earlier. So why would Mark lie about something so easily verifiable? Those of you who've had your intuition dismissed will understand the feeling. That gnawing sensation that something's wrong, even when everyone tells you you're being paranoid. The ultrasound appointment arrived and Helen insisted on coming into the examination room with me. The technician was someone Helen knew. They exchanged meaningful glances that made my stomach turn. As the wand moved across my belly, revealing our baby's profile, I heard Helen's sharp intake of breath. "It's a girl," the technician announced cheerfully. Helen's face went ashen. She excused herself quickly, mumbling something about needing air. Through the thin walls, I could hear her on the phone in the hallway, her voice urgent and hushed. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. This was not a happy grandmother discussing her granddaughter. That evening, Mark seemed distant. He barely looked at the ultrasound photos, mumbling congratulations before disappearing into his study. I found Helen standing in the nursery doorway staring at the crib with an expression I'd never seen before. Not joy, not excitement, something much darker. When I approached her, she quickly composed herself. "Such a beautiful baby," she said, but her voice was flat, almost mechanical. "Though you know, dear, the family has always been blessed with strong boys, 5 generations of firstborn sons." I wanted to ask what that meant for our daughter, but something in Helen's tone warned me off. Instead, I smiled and nodded, filing away this strange comment for later analysis. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mark was restless too, tossing and turning beside me. Around 2 a.m., I heard voices downstairs, Helen and Mark talking in urgent whispers. I crept to the top of the stairs, my heart pounding. "Can't let this happen," Helen was saying. "The bloodline, the inheritance, Everything depends on a male heir. You know what your father's will specifies. But Mom, it's not the 1800s. We can try again. Try again. Mark, she's 7 months along. There's still time to handle this situation. I have connections at the hospital. We could say there were complications, that we tried everything. My blood turned to ice. Were they actually discussing what I thought they were discussing? What exactly are you suggesting? Mark's voice was barely a whisper. An injection, something to induce premature labor. At 7 months, chances of survival are minimal, especially if there are respiratory complications. These things happen, Mark. Tragic, but natural. The word that haunts me still echoed through that house. Eliminate the problem before it's too late. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. They weren't just discussing disappointment about the gender. They were planning to eliminate my unborn daughter. Eliminate. Such a clinical word for something so monstrous. I crept back to bed, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. People didn't actually do things like this in 2024. But as I lay there, details from the past months started clicking into place like pieces of a horrific puzzle. The metallic taste in Helen's special smoothies, her insistence on preparing all my food, the way she monitored my every move, claiming it was concern for the baby's health, the extra medical appointments with doctors who seemed to know her personally. Had she been trying to harm my pregnancy all along? And if a simple gender reveal could trigger such an extreme response, what lengths would they go to now? I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal while secretly researching pregnancy complications that could be artificially induced. What I found made my blood run cold. Helen's nursing background would give her access to medications that could cause exactly the kind of natural complications she'd described to Mark. My husband, the man I'd promised to love and trust, was planning to eliminate our daughter because she wasn't the son his family demanded. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'm actually a pharmaceutical researcher for a biotech company. My expertise is in drug interactions and side effects. Helen had no idea she was discussing medical murder with someone who understood exactly how such a plan would work. But I'd spent months playing the role of the naive, dependent daughter-in-law, grateful for Helen's guidance and expertise. They saw me as weak, controllable, someone who wouldn't question medical authority. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As Helen began adding new supplements to my daily routine, vitamins I didn't recognize with labels that had been removed, I made a decision. I would play their game, but by my rules. I started documenting everything. Photos of the unmarked pills, recordings of their late-night conversations. I even managed to get samples of Helen's special smoothies to my lab for analysis under the pretense of checking for allergens. The results confirmed my worst fears. Helen had been systematically introducing mild toxins into my diet. Nothing immediately harmful, but substances that could weaken my pregnancy and make later complications seem natural. But that was just the beginning. Because 3 nights later, Helen entered my bedroom carrying a syringe, and my husband stood frozen in the doorway, watching his mother prepare to murder his own child. "This will all be over soon, dear," Helen whispered, approaching my bed. "Sometimes nature needs a little help making the right decisions." Mark stood silhouetted in the doorway, not moving to stop her, not calling for help, just watching as his mother prepared to inject unknown substances into his pregnant wife. In that moment, I realized the full scope of their betrayal. This wasn't just about disappointment over gender. This was about money, inheritance, and a family legacy built on the systematic elimination of anyone who didn't fit their predetermined mold. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was just another victim in their generational game of genetic manipulation. They had no idea I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. As Helen raised the syringe, I looked directly at Mark and said the words that would change everything. "I hope the recording is picking up the lighting clearly." The color drained from both their faces as they realized the small device on my nightstand wasn't just a pregnancy sound machine. You see, I'd discovered something else during my research into Helen's background. This wasn't her first time playing God with family pregnancies. Medical records I'd obtained through professional channels showed a disturbing pattern of pregnancy complications among Mark's previous sisters-in-law. 3 women. 3 mysterious late-term losses. 3 women who'd all lived in this house under Helen's care. I wasn't just fighting for my daughter's life. I was fighting to expose a family legacy of systematic elimination that had been going on for decades. The syringe in Helen's hand contained enough medication to induce immediate labor and ensure my daughter wouldn't survive. But the evidence I'd been gathering would ensure that this time, the elimination wouldn't go unnoticed. Because while they'd been planning my daughter's death, I'd been planning their destruction. And unlike their previous victims, I knew exactly what they were doing, and I had the scientific expertise to prove it. The game was about to change completely. They thought they were eliminating a problem, but they were actually creating the evidence that would eliminate them. The badge I pulled from my nightstand wasn't pharmaceutical identification. It was federal. Helen's hand trembled as she read the words, Federal Bureau of Investigation, emblazoned across the leather wallet. Special Agent Amanda Torres, I said calmly, sitting up in bed despite the syringe still inches from my arm. And you, Helen Morrison, are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, medical malpractice resulting in death, and racketeering under the RICO Act. Mark stumbled backward, his face a mask of confusion and terror. Amanda, what the hell is going on? What's going on, Mark, is that your family has been systematically murdering daughters-in-law for 3 generations, and the FBI has been building a case against this operation for the past 18 months. The syringe clattered to the floor as Helen's legs gave out. She collapsed into the chair beside my bed, her face the color of old parchment. That's impossible. You're pregnant. You're just a researcher. I am a researcher, a federal researcher specializing in pharmaceutical crimes, and yes, I was pregnant. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling the slight movement beneath, but not quite the way you think. Dr. Sarah Martinez emerged from the bathroom, where she'd been recording everything through a 2-way mirror. The fetal heartbeat you've been monitoring belongs to a sophisticated medical device designed to simulate pregnancy symptoms. Amanda lost her first pregnancy to your little cocktail of toxins 18 months ago. Helen's eyes widened in recognition. Sarah Martinez, you were Mark's girlfriend before you murdered my baby, yes. Sarah's voice was ice-cold professional, but I could see the years of grief and rage burning behind her eyes. That's when I contacted the FBI. That's when we developed this operation. Mark sank against the doorframe. Sarah, I thought you moved to California. I thought we just grew apart. You grew apart from your girlfriend because your mother killed our child, and you helped cover it up. Sarah pulled out her own badge. Medical Examiner's Office, Federal Division. Every miscarriage in this house has been documented, Mark. Every false death certificate, every forged medical record. The pieces were falling into place with devastating precision. This wasn't just about my pregnancy or even Sarah's. This was about a systematic operation that had been destroying families for decades. Lisa, I called toward the hallway, you can come in now. Mark's sister appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears but her posture resolute. Hello, Mark. Hello, Mother. Lisa, thank God you're here. These women are insane. They're claiming exactly what I told them 18 months ago when I first contacted Agent Torres. Lisa stepped into the room, revealing the recording device she'd been carrying. Every conversation we've had about the family tradition, every discussion about maintaining bloodlines, every celebration when another daughter-in-law lost her baby girl. Helen's face crumpled. Lisa, you don't understand. The inheritance requirements. Your grandfather's will. Grandfather's will never specified male heirs only, Mother. I've had 3 independent lawyers review it. That was just your interpretation, your excuse for playing God with other women's bodies. I watched Mark's world collapse in real time. The inheritance, it was never really about money, was it? No, Sarah said, pulling out a thick file. It was about control. Helen Morrison has a documented history of narcissistic personality disorder with delusions of genetic superiority. She genuinely believed she was improving the family line by eliminating female offspring. The federal wiretaps from the past 6 months painted a horrifying picture. Helen hadn't just been targeting daughters-in-law. She'd been running a network through her former hospital connections, offering discreet pregnancy management services to families who wanted to ensure proper genetic outcomes. "The nursing home," I said, watching Helen's face for confirmation. "Your father isn't just living there. He's running the operation from there." Helen's silence was confirmation enough. Robert Morrison, age 89, former chief of obstetrics at 3 major hospitals, Sarah read from the file. Currently residing at Sunset Manor Extended Care, where he's been coordinating with medical staff to provide selective pregnancy termination services for families concerned about genetic inheritance. The scope was staggering. What I'd thought was a personal family tragedy was actually part of a multi-generational eugenics operation disguised as medical care. "How many?" Mark whispered. "How many babies?" 47 confirmed cases over 30 years, I replied. 47 families who thought they were experiencing natural pregnancy complications. 47 couples who blamed themselves for losses that were actually murders. The weight of that number settled over the room like a funeral shroud. 47 daughters, eliminated before they could even take their first breath. But there was something else, something I hadn't revealed yet. "Mark," I said quietly, "there's one more thing you need to know about your family's operation." He looked up at me with eyes that had aged decades in the past hour. "Your mother didn't just target daughters-in-law. She targeted any pregnancy that threatened the family's control structure, including pregnancies within the family itself." Lisa stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell him about Rebecca." Mark frowned. "Rebecca? I don't know any Rebecca." "Your sister, Rebecca," Lisa said. "Born when you were 3 years old, lived for exactly 6 hours before experiencing sudden respiratory failure." The color drained from Mark's face. "I don't have another sister. You're my only sister." "Check the birth certificates, Mark. Check the hospital records. Rebecca Morrison, born healthy, died from what the medical report calls unexplained complications. But the real medical examiner's report shows evidence of induced respiratory distress." Helen was sobbing now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of a woman watching her life's work crumble around her. "She would have inherited everything," Helen whispered. "She was the firstborn. The will would have gone to her, not to Mark. I couldn't let that happen." I felt physically sick. Helen had murdered her own daughter to ensure her son would inherit the family wealth. "How many others?" Sarah demanded. "How many of your own children did you eliminate?" "Just Rebecca. Just the one who threatened everything we'd built." But Lisa was shaking her head. "No, Mother. Tell them about Michael." "Michael?" Mark was completely lost now. "Your twin brother," Lisa said gently, "born 17 minutes after you, died 3 days later from what the official report calls failure to thrive." The room went silent except for Helen's increasingly hysterical sobbing. Twins, Sarah explained to Mark, meant the inheritance would be split. Helen couldn't control which twin would inherit what, so she eliminated the complication. I watched Mark absorb the fact that his mother had murdered his twin brother, his infant sister, and countless other children over the decades. The man I'd married, the man who'd stood by while his mother prepared to murder our daughter, was himself a survivor of his mother's systematic infanticide. But here's where the story takes another turn. Because while we were securing justice for the 47 confirmed victims, I was about to discover something that would change everything I thought I knew about my own role in this operation. The pregnancy wasn't entirely fake. Agent Torres, Dr. Martinez said carefully, "We need to discuss your medical status." I frowned. "What do you mean? The device has been simulating." "The device has been supplementing, not simulating. Amanda, you're actually pregnant, about 12 weeks along." The room spun around me. "That's impossible. I've been on contraceptives specifically to prevent—" Helen's drug cocktails included fertility enhancers along with the toxins. She wasn't just trying to eliminate your fake pregnancy. She was ensuring you'd get pregnant and then controlling the outcome. I pressed my hand to my stomach, feeling for the first time what might be actual fetal movement, rather than mechanical simulation. "The morning sickness you attributed to stress from the operation," Sarah continued gently. "The fatigue you blamed on the investigation schedule. Those were real pregnancy symptoms." Helen looked up through her tears, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of prosecution, fear of failure. "You're pregnant with the granddaughter I tried to eliminate," she whispered. "After everything, after all the planning, you're still going to have the daughter who inherits everything." The twisted irony was almost too much to process. While I'd been playing the role of a pregnant woman to catch a serial killer, I'd actually become pregnant for real. Helen's own drugs had ensured the pregnancy she was trying to prevent, but that wasn't the end of the complications. Mark stood up slowly, his movements mechanical and strange. "If Amanda's really pregnant now, and if she's really a federal agent, then everything about our marriage was part of an undercover operation," I confirmed. "I'm sorry, Mark, but given your family history and your documented compliance with your mother's activities, the Bureau needed someone on the inside. Our wedding, our entire relationship, was any of it real?" I looked at this man who'd stood by while his mother prepared to murder a child, and I felt something break inside my chest. Not love, something harder to define. "The feelings were real," I said quietly, "but they were based on a version of you that I'd hoped existed, a version that would protect his wife and child instead of enabling their murder." Mark's face crumpled, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy for him. He'd made his choices. The FBI raid that followed was swift and comprehensive. Not just Helen's house, but the entire network. Sunset Manor, 3 affiliated hospitals, and the homes of 12 medical professionals who'd been part of the operation. The evidence we'd gathered over 18 months was overwhelming. Wiretaps, medical records, financial transactions, and testimonies from families who'd lost daughters under suspicious circumstances. But sitting in that courtroom 6 months later, watching Helen receive a life sentence without parole, I felt something unexpected. Emptiness. Justice had been served. 47 families finally had answers. The systematic murder of infant girls had been stopped, but the cost had been enormous. Mark had cooperated fully with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he was still facing years in federal prison for his role in covering up the murders. Lisa was in therapy, trying to process the fact that her mother had murdered 2 of her siblings. Sarah had testified with devastating precision, but still struggled with the trauma of losing her own child. And me? I was raising a daughter alone, knowing she was the granddaughter Helen had tried to eliminate, the child whose very existence had exposed decades of systematic infanticide. My daughter Emma was born healthy and perfect, with no trace of the toxins Helen had introduced into my system during those early weeks. The medical team had monitored every stage of the pregnancy, ensuring that Helen's drug cocktails hadn't caused any lasting damage. But there were nights when I'd hold Emma and wonder what kind of world I'd brought her into. A world where medical professionals could systematically murder infants for decades without detection. A world where families could value inheritance over human life. A world where I'd had to lie about my identity for 18 months to protect children from their own grandmothers. The support group I started for families affected by Helen's network has grown to over 200 members. We meet twice a week in a community center downtown, sharing stories and working through the complex trauma of learning that our pregnancy losses weren't natural. Some days are better than others. Some days the victory feels real and meaningful. Other days I'm overwhelmed by the realization that Helen's operation was probably not unique, that there are likely other families, other networks, other systematic eliminations happening right now that we haven't discovered yet. But then Emma laughs, or reaches for my face with her tiny fingers, and I remember why this was all worth it. She exists because we stopped them. 47 other daughters who might have been born will never get that chance. But Emma will grow up in a world where at least one network of murderers has been exposed and eliminated. The letter I received from Helen in prison changed everything I thought I knew about forgiveness and healing. In it, she didn't apologize or express remorse. Instead, she detailed the systematic abuse she'd suffered as a child, the way her own mother had eliminated her twin sister, and the generational trauma that had shaped her into a monster. It didn't excuse what she'd done. Nothing could excuse the systematic murder of children, but it helped me understand that evil isn't born in a vacuum. It's created, nurtured, and passed down through generations of people who refuse to break the cycle. I chose to break the cycle. Instead of pursuing maximum sentences for everyone involved, I advocated for treatment and education. Instead of seeking revenge against Mark, I worked to ensure Emma would know her father despite his crimes. Instead of letting Helen's evil poison my relationship with my daughter, I chose to focus on healing and hope. The price of power, real power, the power to stop systematic evil, is accepting that victory doesn't always feel like winning. It often feels like loss, like sacrifice, like standing in the ruins of everything you thought you knew about the world. But sometimes, late at night when Emma is sleeping peacefully in her crib, I remember Helen approaching my bed with that syringe and Mark standing frozen in the doorway, and I know that every sacrifice was worth it. Because my daughter will grow up knowing that when evil tried to eliminate her, justice fought back and won. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to change the world.